لا يبلغه ملك مقرب ولا نبي مرسل. No favored angel and no messenger of Allah has reached this position that our imams have. So the imams now are higher than the prophets. This is written with the pen and name of Khomeini of Iran. Whoever has this belief is an unbeliever. Whoever believes that Ali, this is another belief, they call it Ar-Raj'a, that towards the end of the world, Ali will come back into this world. And then with the Mahdi, they will now raise Abu Bakr, will bring them back to life, Umar, Uthman, Aisha, and he will now nail them to the cross. It is written, we should do a lecture on Shia. Since we don't know the extent of what they are, that anybody that was an opponent to Ali will be nailed to the cross and punished by Ali. Whoever has this belief is also an unbeliever. They believe that all the companions of the Prophet, all of them, with the exception of 4, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Miqdad ibn Aswad, Salman al-Farisi, and Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, all others, Kanu ala Ridda, they apostatized after the Prophet of Allah. All the companions are unbelievers. So when you say Abu Bakr, the Shia will say La'natullahi alayhi. So, and they are very skillful. They will let you know. If they are discussing with you, what I read about them, I almost doubted it when I made the Shia in Kaduna. When he says Imam Malik, he says Rahimahullah. And I said, I thought this used to cause the companions. He said Rahimahullah. Until I was able to corner him. And he started saying those things. They have a place called Karbala in Iraq. They believe that Karbala is holier than the Kaaba. The Shia, a real Shia, not the one that is just a Fenuje. The real Shia does not prostrate on the ground. They prostrate on Turbatul Karbala, a baked clay from Karbala. That's what they prostrate on. So they take it all over the world. So they have terrible creeds in their own books. So anybody who has those belief is an unbeliever. But we have Shia, just as we have Sunnah. We don't know anything. What are you Shia? What's the Shia Sunnah? You know Shia, we have Husseiniya, and Sunni they have mosque. He's a Shia, but he does not know all those beliefs. So you can't call that one a kafir. That one does not know anything. And there are also some people who know that belief, who say that they've rejected it. That they believe that, that it is a form of extremism. But the problem is that we are not sure they are being truthful. That's not the problem. They're not sure. They do take the key whereby they say whatever they like and they don't believe in it. So whoever has those disastrous beliefs is an unbeliever. So that is the response I will give for the Shia. Yeah. What do we do as a community? Very simple. And this question is very important. Wallahi, in Islam, we have not been mandated to fight with anybody. Even if the person disagrees with us. In fact, this is their democracy. It's very good, except for Islam. Because in democracy, you can say whatever you believe. Don't just violate the right of others. Very good. I will come out and say that, yes, I believe in Tawheed. And another person will come out and say that I believe in 3 in 1. So we will now see who has the intellectual, and if you look at it, before September 11th, the rate at which Islam was growing in the West was alarming. Churches were being bought and converted into mosques. Churches were being bought and converted into mosques. In Birmingham, in Philadelphia, in the US, you see hijab flowing. I told someone this morning that I listened to a Saudi Sheikh, Suhaimi, who said that when you go to America, they'll open the prisons for them. That if you preach to Muslims, to people in the prison, they become Muslim and their character changes. They gave them free movement until September the 11th. So youth are not patient. The only thing we need is very easy: education and reorientation. We call it a tarbiyah wa tasfiyah. So when I see somebody doing something bad, I hold that person an explanation. Even if, when I learned this, I was at rest. I mean, those things they are doing will be so painful at times. Let me give you an example. A man died. He had 2 wives. The first wife had a son. And the second wife had daughters, about 4 daughters. So the man died, the daughter said, but let me explain to the son. So I called the son, said, this is what we want to do. We are not going to eat the corpse. We want to do it for the benefit of the corpse. And the man said, no! I said, hey, take the corpse, you can go. The day we learn that the only thing we owe people is explanation, we'll be at rest. If somebody does nikah, and instead of asking the wali, did you give your daughter to this man? He didn't ask that person. He only started calling Adhan. I've heard of that. I only owe the wali an explanation that, hey Baba, there's no nikah. This Hayalan nikah. And if Baba did that, well, leave this thing like that, alhamdulillah, I've done what is compulsory on me. So what we need to do as a community is to continue educating people so we will not accept what we are saying until 10 years later. Are you following? So it's just, let us just be consistent and continue educating the people. This is what Islam says. This is the evidence for it. Allah would, inshallah, make it easy. Yeah, the main question. Yeah, before that, what about the Quran?
Let's keep that.
Okay. No, you announced the walima, and I want to clarify that.
Okay.
Some scholars hold that walima is a bid'ah. They are in the minority. Some scholars hold that there is nothing wrong with the walima of the Quran. Personally, the opinion I hold is that there is nothing wrong with walima, because the walima is just come and eat. Something good has happened to us in our house. My child can now read the Quran. So I am celebrating. Eat food and then go. That's what they are doing there. If that is the case, I don't know anything that makes it a bid'ah. And I will respect anybody who will not come there who believes it's a bid'ah. I respect his opinion. But I believe there's nothing bid'ah in it. That's the short. The wife that went out without her husband permission, when they gave that sister out as a wife, they cannot revoke that again. It was wrong for her to leave the house of her husband without permission. She is still married to that man. Even if the family say they want to disown her, the man is still the one. The man is the C-in-C, commander-in-chief of that sister until he divorces her or she seeks divorce. So she should not be afraid of her family. She should be afraid of the relationship between her and her husband. And then the last one, I answered that very shortly, but let me answer the last one. Yes, the compilation of the Quran. One way of identifying bid'ah, especially when we argue from the angle of compilation of the Quran or general evidences or qiyas, is what we call as-sunnatu at-tarkiyya. As-sunnatu at-tarkiyya. When we say what is the sunnah of the Prophet, we say what the Prophet said, right? What he did, and what he saw others doing and he ratified. In addition to what the Prophet did, we had to it what the Prophet did not do. Are you following? If the Prophet deliberately stops doing something, and there is a compelling reason for him to do it, one, and there's nothing stopping him from doing that thing, two, and he didn't do it, bringing that thing is a bid'ah. I don't know if you get it. Explanation will make it clearer. At the time of the Prophet, the foundation of the Kaaba were not built on the foundation of Ibrahim. And the Prophet said, I would have loved to build the Kaaba on the foundations of Ibrahim. Is there a compelling reason why he should do that? Yes. But he could not do it because the people of Mecca were still new to Islam. That is something that prevented him. So when the Prophet died, the companions of the Prophet, namely Abdullah ibn Zubayr, demolished the Kaaba and built it on the foundations of Ibrahim. Is that a bid'ah? No, because we wanted to do it, but there was something preventing him from doing it. But if there was a compelling reason for the Prophet to do it, he didn't, and there's nothing preventing him, and then he also did not do it, it means doing that thing is a bid'ah. But before taking this issue one after the other, let me discuss evidences for this. When we go for Eid, and then we enter the Eid ground, do we make the adhan? Do we make the iqamah? When we put our dead down and we are about to pray for that person, do we make the adhan? Do we make the iqamah? What is the evidence for that? As-sunnatu at-tarkiyya. the Prophet does not use to make the adhan and the iqamah. Are we following? So if you want to say that, I look at the evidence that says that "Wadhkurullah dhikran kathira," that la yazal lisanu karutan bi dhikrillah. Remember Allah a lot. We say that yes, the evidence is general and applicable, but it will not be applicable in this regard because the Prophet, who had the better understanding of what he said, did not implement it that way. Are we following? That is what we call a sunnatu at-tarkiyah. And this was one thing the companions of Prophet used to argue with. One by one, a caliph at that time brought the mimbar out on the day of Eid. The companions said, you cannot do this. And he said, why? They said, because the Prophet does not used to bring out the what? The mimbar. And that bid'ah became known as al-bid'atu al-marwaniyya, Marwan's bid'ah. Apart from that, Marwan did not do the khutbah after the salah. He brought the khutbah before the salah. And they asked him why. He said, because if we delay it till after the salah, people will not listen. And the companion said, yes, it may be a very rational argument, but Muhammad did not do it that way. Now let's look at the compilation of the Quran. Number one, was there a reason for the Prophet to compile the Quran and in his own time? There was none. There was none. Because revelation was constant. I mean, some people say that the last verse that was read was Al-Yawma Akmaltu Lakum Dinakum. It wasn't. Even after the last Hajj, revelation continued. Wa Atmamtu Alaykum Nimati. That was the last verse. So there was no reason for the Prophet to compile it. Number two, and then fortunately, our father that spoke, he was bringing evidences that buttress this. When Abu Bakr when Umar went to Abu Bakr, why did they compile the Quran in the book form? Because at the battle of Yamama, 70 of the Quran, memorizers of the Quran died. And Umar said, if you don't compile the Quran, it may get lost. And when they came to Abu Bakr, please, who can remember the first thing Abu Bakr said? He said, the Prophet did not do it. Are you following? When Abu Bakr later agreed and he called Zayd bin Thabit, he gave the same response. He said, Shay'un lam yaf'alu Rasul alayhi salam. They also understood that, okay, we're not supposed to do it. Until they realized that, well, there was no reason for the Prophet not to compile it. And what was the compilation of Abu Bakr? It is different from the compilation of Uthman bin Affan. They got the pieces and bits and pieces of where the Quran was revealed and kept it in a codex and kept it with the half-saw. So at the time of the Prophet, there was no reason. More so, the Quran was being memorized by the Prophet and a lot of other people. If you don't know a verse, go to the Prophet, he will tell you. And then he will call the Quran, those who are memorizing the Quran around him. So they will produce the Quran. So there was no reason for them to compile it in book form, which happened later after he died. Then the recension of Uthman happened because people, for the Arabs, as our father said, when they write Ba, there was no diacritical mark, no dots, no fatha. So how do you know it's Ba or Ya or Ta? It can be anything. So this was introduced by Uthman upon the recitation of the Quraysh. For the Arabs, when they pick up the Mus'haf, they were not using the written Quran as they were not reciting directly from it. It was used as a memory aid. Because they would hold it, okay, and then they would recite what they wanted to recite. Then Uthman did the recitation on the Quran at that time. And then they spread it out. Also, Adib bin Bid'ah, the companions of Muhammad who were alive, would not have unanimously accepted that from Uthman bin Affan. They would have been the first people to kick against it. So when we talk about as-sunnah to tarkiyah, what the Prophet did not do, with a compelling reason for him to do it, and something preventing him from doing it, and then the companions coming after, and they are not introducing it, that is what we say is a bid'ah. So the compilation of the Quran does not fall into the classification of what is a bid'ah. And let me give you an example, a very funny one. So let me leave this place on a shocking note. In our mosque, we build barriers separating the males from the females, right? Because we don't want the males to be looking at the females. So let us apply this rule that I said. At the time of the Prophet, was there a reason for the Prophet to build this barrier? Yes. People could look back And in fact, we have evidence that some of the companions, there was one beautiful woman that used to pray. Some of the companions, when they do ruku, used to look at her for marriage. And everyone was aware of this. But it didn't build the barrier. In fact, what he said was that allow the men to rise up from their sujood before you women will do what? Rise up. So there was a reason for him to do it. Was there anything preventing them? Like the level of technology at that time? There was none. They could just have taken a mat or anything that used as a barrier. So those barriers that we have in our mosques are actually a form of innovation. And in the mosque of the Prophet, we didn't have any barrier as such. And you now realize it. A lot of times, questions arise because sisters can't see the mistake of the imam. When the imam makes a mistake, because sisters are not there, they are being separated. I'm not saying that sisters are on a separate floor. I'm talking about the barrier that we make that cuts off. If it's little, you still understand, it's still really welcome. But we cover the sisters, and in some mosques, women don't even have a space. That's another bid'ah. Because the messenger's mosque, there was a space for women. Our taqwa cannot be more than the message of Allah. Say, okay, women should not come to this mosque again. Which mosque is our own? And this prevalent up north. Whether as a woman, you are not expected to come to the mosque. This is not the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So we may continue discussing and debating this issue. My hope is that what I've said has stimulated or will stimulate a lot of intellectual discussions, which we will go on questioning and asking until Allah makes us arrive at the truth. May Allah SWT make it easy for us.